right, good morning. Official start here, guys. How are you? All happy Christmas? Everybody wearing their Christmas goodies? No, not really.
Same old, same old.
All right, we are in chapter 13, page 119 of the notes in Revelation. This beast out of the sea and this beast out of the earth. Before I read that, I want to go back to something I read out of this book called Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. And I found this first paragraph of this chapter pretty amazing. It states, in the summer of 313, now think about this, the persecution under Nero was AD 70, 69-70. Persecution under Domitian, AD 95. This is 200 years later. Okay? It's been going on for 200 years. Okay? And this is an example of what kind of things were done. In the summer of 313, Carthage was a city on edge, an ancient rival of Rome for the rule of the Western Mediterranean, destroyed by the legions and then, just as Corinth had been, refounded as a Roman colony. Its commanding position on the coastline across from Sicily had won for it an undisputed status as the capital of Africa. Like Rome and Alexandria, it had grown to become one of the great centers of Christianity, a status much seated, in the words of one Carthaginian Christian, by the blood of the martyrs. In Africa, the church had long treasured the scars of persecution. The judicial execution in 258 of Carthage's most celebrated bishop, a noted scholar by the name of Cyprian. Remember that name? From our history, it's the Cyprian plague, and he was one of the ones that was baptizing hundreds of people a day during the Black Plague. Had confirmed them in a peculiarly militant understanding of their faith. Purity was all. There could be no compromising with the evils of the world. Belief was nothing if it was not worth dying for. This was why, in 303, when an imperial edict was issued commanding Christians to hand over their books of scripture or face death, Africa had been on the forefront of the resistance to the decree. The provincial authorities, determined to break the church, had expanded on its edict by commanding that everyone make sacrifice to the gods. Recalcitrant Christians were rounded up and brought in chains to Carthage. Batches of them had been executed. By the time, 2 years later, that the persecution finally petered out, the conviction of Christians across Africa that God demanded a purity of belief, absolutely and untainted, had been fertilized with yet more martyrs' blood. 10 years on from the most savage persecution endured by the Church of Carthage, the mood in the city was anxious, fractious, fraught. The death of its bishop, Majorinus, served as a lightning rod for various tensions. One question predominated: how, in the wake of a concentrated effort to wipe the church from the face of Africa, were Christians best to defend the sanctity of their faith? So just astounding what those guys did.
You know, Hebrews talks about the crowd of witnesses.
Yes.
As we live our lives. You know, the African congregations are staunch resistors of the social Nicolaitan issues that are coming up right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are the ones that are leading the churches and saying, no, it's not.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing how persecution refines thinking. You know, so last chapter we were talking about this whole period of time, times, and half a time, this time of persecution, but it calls it a time of what was the term we used last time? Of nurture. I mean, I just think that, you know, we take this thing so granted. We just like half-heartedly carry these things around. We have plenty of them. And you know, the book of Revelation, you know, is one of the biggest that points out how crucial pure faith is and what it means to do that. No compromise whatsoever. Okay, it's okay to eat meat, okay, that's sacrificed to idols. I think that statement was made prior to the fact that you're going to have to at some point draw a line in the sand. And where would that be? And it may cost you your life. I think this is, I could have read this anywhere in this book of Revelation. And there's a section here we'll get to. I was like, well, I'll just hold that for there. But last week I didn't read that because I was going to eat up too much class time, so I waste class in 2 classes instead of 1. Waste time. All right, so we're into chapter 13. And to keep you guys from having to read, I'll do some reading here. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Now, again, remember we had an angel who stood on the waters and stood on the earth. And this one, there's 2 dragons. There's this beast from the sea and a beast from the earth. And one stands on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to wage war with him?" There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills the sword, with the sword he must be killed. There is the perseverance and the faith. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. All right, so the end of the previous chapter sets the stage for this one. What tactics will Satan use to overcome Israel, the spiritual Israel, and her children? How is he going to do this? What mechanisms? And finally we get down to where we're talking about a little more earthly things here. Excuse me as my Bible slides on. So this beast comes up from the sea, and again we've made the conjecture that the sea is a symbol of society. You can go to all these places that I've listed there, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Revelation, to see where we've already done that. The 10 horns are the fullness of power, and we'll get there in a little bit. There are some people who think there are actually 10 separate kingdoms that are illustrated here. I heard one preacher the other day, goes back to the 7 churches and says that that 7th church and the 7th kingdom is Great Britain after the World War II. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how you get there, but that's where he said. 7 heads are completeness of intelligence. 10 diadems, and again, these are diadems, not Stephanos, and this is earthly rule. Okay, this beast first looks good. It looks like religion, but it has the names of blasphemy. What is blasphemous? Okay, commandments 1 and 2, which are
The Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind.
okay,
And your neighbor as yourself.
yeah, of Exodus 20. Is there is only one God, and don't take his name in vain. And the beast I saw resembled a leopard. Okay, what are these symbols? Let's go back to Daniel chapter 7 and look at very, very similar language. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And therefore before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And I was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. So it might be that we're talking about the same thing here. So a lion with a man's heart has human character. A bear strong and crushing. A leopard having 4 wings and 4 heads, and this beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. So Daniel 7:17 through 23 essentially translates those symbols for us. It says the 4 great beasts are the 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth, but the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Forever, yes, forever and ever. So essentially, 1, 2, 3, after the 4th comes God's kingdom. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying. With its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot what was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will appear different from the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. So this 4th beast is the Roman Empire. It is the greatest of the old world empires. It had the tearing power of Chaldea. The Chaldeans are symbolized by the lion. It had the crushing force of the Medo-Persian Empire, symbolized by the bear, and the swift and ferocious character of Macedonia under Alexander, who has been called the leopard. So these 10 horns may represent 10 specific kingdoms of persecution. And you can go back to page 21 on that there may actually be 10 separate persecutions that happened under the full set of leaders, maybe. But after the 10 kings, there's one who will defeat the other 3. This seems to fit with Constantine, who defeated Maximin, Licinius, and Diocletian, bringing the Eastern and Western empires into one. And I find it interesting that you think, okay, persecution ended under Constantine in what, 313 was it? That he said, okay, Christianity is an official religion. In fact, it becomes the official religion of the Roman government. I find it interesting that his son, Julian, you have to kind of read a lot about Constantine. His son Julian was brought up as a Christian, and after his father died, he brought about some of the worst of the persecutions ever. When he changed his mind, he wanted to go back to paganism, and he began to persecute Christians again. He had a big rebellion.
Have you, I'm sure you have, read that the 4th beast was Latin itself? in that, in the first part, and it's broken into two parts. First being empirical Rome, and the second being the church itself.
Yes, you could say that, because, even though Rome fell in 4 something.
And they're saying that was when the first was wounded.
Yes.
Rome, the empirical, was wounded,
Right.
but yet
It
church
raised up as the
church.
church and used its power against people as the church. Yes, I've heard that. And although it seems to fit in a way, and many times it does, I'm not sure that's where I'd go with it. As I'm reading here, the history of the Roman Church and what they did or didn't do, and how they went through monasticism and how they went through a purification. 1033, there was a big Reformation brought about by the Roman Catholic Church. They were still popes, and popes fought with Roman Caesars. They still called them Caesars as late as 1033. And the people lost the ability to speak Latin in Rome, and especially the church were the only people who spoke Latin by that time. Rome and Italy had been invaded by so many others. They were speaking other languages. So by the time you get to some of the great reformers in 1400 or so, you're not allowed to do anything in the church if it wasn't through Latin itself.
That continued into the 20th century.
Well,
Yeah.
High Mass is conducted in Latin today. I don't know if I'd go that far, and we'll get to what some of the possibilities are here. So this next week, exactly as you see, one of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound. But the fatal wound had been healed, and the whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Okay, so possible interpretations, and they're quite varied. I'll cite where you can go find that in one of the commentaries. Could it be the death stroke to the beast was the resurrection, ascension, and coronation of Christ, which stunned the beast until the church had gained a foothold in the world? Is it talking about this beast was Satan? The 7 heads are the 7 heathen or anti-God powers that arose to oppose God and his people. I can't go there necessarily, but it is one of the theories. The death stroke is Nero, whose persecution arose again in Domitian. Tacitus, the Roman historian, says of Domitian, the death stroke was healed, referring to Nero. So essentially, that Nero was reincarnated as Domitian. He's another Nero. There's a term for it. Mike used it. He says, "Steve, have you gotten to it's Latin for new Nero?" They call Domitian the new Nero. And do you remember that term?
We use terms like neo-Nazism.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like that. Yeah. So Tertullian wrote of Domitian, a man of Nero's type, and Victorinus in 304 AD lists 5 fallen emperors, 1 slain Nero, and 1 a resurrected Nero, who was Domitian. Does it fit more like, I don't know. I do think that throughout this book, the Roman Catholic Church, and we'll get to it here in a little bit, almost plays a role as a persecutor as opposed to the church. So what happened to faithful followers? And again, we tend to follow the Western Empire of the church and not the Eastern Empire. There were 2 separate empires, Rome and Byzantine, or Rome and Constantinople, which became Istanbul, which was later invaded by the Islamics, etc. But there were at one time 2 popes that fought amongst each other. There were a number of popes in a number of fractions, and that's one of the things why Constantine said, I want to bring about a new Catholic, a new standard way of doing things, because there were all these fractions of churches who put up their own leaders, bishop against bishop, and et cetera. And he says, you know, we got to stop all this confusion. And so he said, we're going to make it one, and it will do things a prescribed way, and that's the way we're going to do it. We're always going to do Hail Mary, you know, et cetera. Anybody ever been to a Catholic Mass? Okay. You repeat back to the, you know, and if you've never been, you're like, what's everybody saying? You know, we just don't do that. You know, I'm sure the first time we were here, you know, all of a sudden we get an elder up there and he reads it and everybody reads, you know, with him or something. I was just like, okay, if you didn't grow up with that, you don't know that.
When did it get first thought of as universal or Catholic?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
That happened under Constantine. It began under Constantine, but it was reinforced by several popes. Absolutely. And part of it is when they started moving to take over territory. The church was initially about making converts. In fact, they forced conversions. You know, be converted to Christianity or die. We're going to force the Jews. They went back to Jerusalem and they forced the Jews to be baptized. Absolutely forced them to be baptized. Now, some of the Jews then said, hey, that's cool. I like this. And they became Christians. But they felt like you had to force these things because even there was paganism until, you know, 1,000 years after Christ. And they said, we need to educate these people on what this is about. You can't just go around being the church, you have to educate. And if they don't know, how will they ever come out of paganism? The first Irish monastic thing came about as a way to eliminate the pagan practice of the Druids.
Well, we wouldn't have San Diego and Las Vegas and all those cities if it weren't for that same mindset that happened at that time.
Yeah. So, all right. So all of the world are easily swayed, okay, by this beast. And he says they worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to wage war with him. Rome was so powerful, and it still is known as probably the greatest kingdom ever. I mean, look at their building projects, their scope of, they invaded the world. They couldn't keep it up over several hundred years, but they kept their stranglehold on the world as long as they could do so. From Ephesians 4:14, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. The followers of Christ would be like him. Essentially said they were given, there were some that did not bow down to him. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know you're a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. So in verse 4, because of its power, because of emperor worship, many are led astray and they love it. They are secure in their power and their empires, and worship that gives it its power. Roman paganism gave power to the Caesars. Caesars then gave power back to that pagan system. Okay, they fed each other. Verse 5. The beast, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and the authority to act for 42 months was given to him. Again, that 42 months is 3.5 years or 1,260 days. This is symbolic of persecution. It's given its power to persecute. In the cyclical writing of Revelation, we see 11:12, where the holy city is trampled underfoot for 42 months. 11:3, where the witnesses prophesied for 1,260 days. 12:6, where the woman spends 1,260 days in the wilderness. 12:14, where the woman is nourished for a time, times half a time. And in Daniel 7:21 through 25, where the saints will be given into the hand of the beast for the time, times half a time. We have to think that that's the same concept of persecution, and it happened here probably more than, and it still happens today. But here it happens where everybody can see it. Yes, it's hundreds of books on Revelation, and everybody will point to something different. You know, Tyndale was persecuted, and those who wanted to publish the Bible and like he did in a language that everybody could understand were persecuted by the church because they were going to lose their power. They had the power. That power was kept in play by the leadership or the government formed that power. That's one of the reasons why so many people are against this church and state thing, is because they're afraid that the government will use religion as its power, like it did. That's why we broke away from England. Okay? Although nowhere in the Constitution does it say there's separation of church and state. That was an offhand comment made by one of the authors of the Constitution, but he was actually speaking the other way around. He wasn't saying that, you know, we need to separate the church from government, but what he was saying, he says we need to eliminate the power of the church in the government, but he says what we do need is the influence of religion on the government. We need that morality to influence the laws of the government. So he was given the power to wage war against the saints. Daniel 7:21-27. I've read this before, so I'm not going to read this again. In fact, it was just earlier in this class. Every tribe, every people, language, and nation. This is used in Daniel 19:19 and in Revelation in a number of places. 14:6, them that dwell on the earth. 5:9. From this group were those that were redeemed. Revelation 7:9, the great multitude that stand before the throne. Revelation 11:9, those who looked upon the corpses of the witnesses who were not buried. And 14:6, the group to which the gospel would be preached. So this persecution is directed against Christians, or perhaps this persecution, this power, this terribleness. If you read this book, it's amazing how Rome got its way through its use of force. Absolutely. And the ultimate of that force is crucifixion. Okay? When somebody doesn't do what you want them to do, by law, decree, whatever other kind of force, you try to starve them to death, that still won't work. Well, just crucify them. Nail them up on the Appian Way so that you walk down that road and it's like telephone poles. Outside a city, they wanted to build a bath, this luxurious retreat for Roman people to go to. They had to force the slaves to do it. The slaves tried to revolt. So they had fields upon fields of crucifixions in order to force the slaves to work. The Roman economy depended upon cheap labor, and that was their way of making it happen, by force. Verse 8, all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, and all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. We'll get to the book of life a little bit later. Looks like all those except Christians were enthralled by this power, this influence. Do you not see that today? I mean, I go into churches now, and it's almost like an anti-culture, and you go out in the world, and the world's doing these crazy things, and it's like, those of us in the church are like, you're nuts. You're just nuts. Right?
Yep.
You feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you're kind of anti-culture?
Steve, so since you have Daniel in there, and you've been talking about Daniel through up until just now, So are you saying that this, after this times and half a time, I'm perplexed by Daniel 7:26, but mainly 27.
Yes.
The end of 26 and 27. So how does that fit in with your thoughts on the 1260 days?
The court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole earth will hand it over to the saints, and the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom. Okay? So, you're thinking
I'm not thinking
this
here.
time of persecution, P, ends up directly in this eternal kingdom. Without a
Something
step in
happens
between.
after times and half a time.
Oh, yeah, this persecution,
Yeah.
3.5.
Does that mean a definite period of time or a short period of time?
Yes. It's a defined period of time of intense persecution. Okay?
350.
It doesn't mean that this period, okay, he says, you reign from this point on, okay? Is that the point where Constantine says you're an official church and the official persecution is over? Or is that some period of time where God says, here is the number of pagan people started to drop off, and here's the number of Christian people? Is it that point that we're talking about?
Yeah, who would be the
because
court?
the number of Christian people out overwhelmed? Or is it a spiritual thing that...
Who would be the court?
Uh,
You haven't mentioned that word court in our metaphors. The court will sit. Who's the court?
The court's in heaven. The court is that final judgment. Okay? Paganism died. Now, certainly there's paganism today. Certainly there's paganism, but no longer is paganism supported by government systems. That disappeared in 313. Never from that point on did paganism become the official edict of any power. Is that what we're talking about? Where Christ has defeated paganism, the earthly reign of Satan on earth, through power of the Roman kingdom was the only kingdom of those four kingdoms, the Medo-Persian, etc., that used a religious system to force its will and to build its economy.
Well, I mean, I don't want to take away from where you're going to
No,
go.
that's fine.
But there's China and there's India with their religion, Buddhism and
Yeah,
Hinduism.
but they're not a government force.
Okay.
They're not prescribed. They're not required by the government.
Well, like North Korea, they have to worship whatever the guy's name is. And they cannot-
Yeah, but I don't know if that you consider that like Caesar worship. Now, it still occurs, okay? It doesn't mean, okay, the battle's won and everything's perfect, okay? That doesn't happen until heaven. But Christ on the cross said, my kingdom has come. Now, does that mean that's where it started or that's where it ended? Is there a period of time where these persecutions increase the Christian influence on the world to the point where paganism is no longer influential as a government system?
Well, just not to be argumentative, but his kingdom came at Pentecost.
Yeah.
So back that
Right.
one up on that
Right.
one.
That
The cross
kingdom
needs to be
began,
thrown
okay?
to the
But
back.
it increased despite the persecution, and paganism decreased. Okay, to which point then Constantine said we're no longer going to support paganism. Okay, from 313, all those temples to Apollo and Athena and all that kind of stuff, they became silted over as the rivers flooded over. The first layers, the first floors of some of those old temples were flooded and silted over, later to be reclaimed by Christians for churches. In fact, the Pantheon only survives to this day because a Christian church used that for various displays of altars to various great Christian martyrs, etc. It became a church. And that's probably the only reason it stands today. The original doors formed in 70 AD, built in 70 AD, still hang at the Pantheon in Rome. Pretty amazing things. And we'll get to it. I think this chapter kind of reveals it, and I haven't quite finished the chapter yet, and I got 5 minutes to finish. I don't think I'm going to get there. So, all of the world, except the Christian, were enthralled by this power. He says, he who has an ear, let him hear. Is this like he does to the churches in the first 7 churches, first 4 chapters? Is he saying, okay, this applies to this time, but this applies to everybody. Think about what this means in your current situation. Verse 10, if anyone's to go to captivity, into captivity he will go. So this is a difficult situation to understand. He says 2 interpretations of this may exist. Don't fight it if it happens to you. If you're arrested, you go, then you're to go, not to fight or try to escape. It is predestined. So Romans 13:2. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. 1 Peter 2:13, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority. Who wrote these words? Who's the author of those 2 books?
Paul,
Right. What happened to Paul in AD 7?
in Rome, prison.
Yeah. Was beheaded, I believe.
Peter wrote
Or,
First Peter. Hey, Peter wrote First Peter. So they
well,
were
yeah,
both
but
written by the same
Peter and
person.
Paul were both, I'm sorry, Peter and Paul were
Okay.
both killed at the time of Nero. One beheaded, one crucified, sorry. All right. So, those who lead the saints into captivity and death physically will be themselves subjected to captivity and death spiritually. So those essentially who take up the sword and kill Christians will eventually, quote, be killed by the sword in the spiritual sense in the second death, not the first death. So I'm saying that this first beast is the power. John reveals this first beast and his power, that to overcome a death stroke, possibly by the continual coming to power of various emperors who persecuted the saints, that to make war against the saints for a period, and the power to gain worship from the community of men whose realm of consciousness only pertained to the physical, enticed by power, influence, and opulence. Clearly, this is the beast, is the Roman Empire, at least the governmental Roman Empire. Now, what supports the governmental empire? He says, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. So it's not from heaven, it comes out of the earth. It has 2 horns like a lamb, it looks like a lamb, it looks like religion, but it's not. There's our Randy. And these 2 horns are just representation of the lamb, or are they referring to 2 powers? If it's possible that these symbols are of 2 powers, which 2? The 2 halves of government, the 2 councils of the Senate? Or is it political power and religious power? Did the state require the sacrifice to the political power of the empire? The political power did require the maintenance of pagan worship and to preserve economic security, incorporation of the conquered, the conscripted, and annexed peoples and societies. It spoke like a dragon, even though the beast looked like religion, it had the words of the dragon, the devil. Revelation 12:16, but the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. So these lies that paganism is spewing are being eaten up by truth. Revelation 16:13. Then I saw the three evil spirits that looked like frogs that came out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And what does the false prophet say? He lies, because that's Satan's character. So 2 Corinthians is a good one here. So this second beast is false religion, who's propped up by the state. I'm not going to get to where we need to go. No, I won't make it. Who? I was hoping to get through this chapter. We'll get there. So, first, the beast out of the sea is what comes up out of society. This is this kingdom, this power, this authority who says, I want to be worshipped and you're going to worship me. In order to make that happen, it needs the men and the pagan society to support it, and they support each other. We'll see that as we go through that chapter. Then, in chapter 13 and 14, we see a change. So anyway, we'll get there.
Maybe next week.
Next week, maybe.
Maybe we'll get to 14 next week.
You know, I got till the end of March to get this done. No, end of February, right? Yeah. I got 8 weeks to hit more chapters than 8, so it's gonna be.
Verse 10 of 13 sounds like it could be what somebody read and kind of invented a Calvinism thought. You know, it's going to happen, whatever happens.
Yeah. How much, I mean, did Christ cross know that this was going to happen, that people were going to have to do it in order for them to conquer, they had to do this? Or, you know, here's this concept. I don't really have to do anything as a Christian because God's going to do what he's going to do. I'll just sit and watch. Or does our compliance, our faith help us along, and is it part of the plan? Are we destined? Cyrus, he just wanted to be left alone. God said, no, I'm going to make you do something. Okay? You don't have a choice in the matter. Pharaoh, I was like, he could have, fine, go. I don't care anymore. No, God said, I'm going to harden your heart. Okay. Does he do that to us too? Does he say, nah, you're predestined to fail, or you're predestined to do something great?
The more we're given, the more we expect.
Yeah. You know, when one person fails, somebody steps into that spot. Don't you see that happening?
He said, I could, referring to the worshipers as Jesus entered Jerusalem, he says, I could have made these stones would have worshipped if these people would have done it.
If these people were quiet, the stones themselves would cry out. It's going to be done whether you're going to be a part of it or not. Yeah, so might as well be a part of it. I mean, these poor guys who went through this kind of stuff, I don't know how they did it. I mean, I think our society is too bound up into the here and now, and you know, we have 401ks. We're planning for something 20 years, 30 years, and well, 2 years now. It's gonna need a while. You know, we do that, and I was like, I may be not given that day.
Like Solomon, leave it to somebody that didn't work for it and didn't deserve it.
Yeah. You know, by the way, guys, Pam's friend Lisa, who was in here 2 weeks ago in class, she's had breast cancer twice, lymphoma once, and they just found breast cancer and some metastasis to her lower spine. So be praying for her. It's gonna be a rough trip for her, the 4th time now. So appreciate your time and prayers.